urgent, fast intro. Music. Plaz with chronic digital ticking. Narrator right now in the heart of Dubai, a $1.3 billion Supertall skyscraper. The most exclusive luxury residential tower in the Middle East when its ribbon was cut is literally cracking apart. Cut 2. Dramatic drone footage over the Dubai Marina skyline, zooming in on a flawless, blindingly white exoskeleton's narrator and the terrifying reality. The elite engineering team who built it were warned this exact structural nightmare would happen before a single billionaire expat ever moved their luggage inside. Upbeat, aggressive U.S. cable news soundbite impact. Narrator. This tower was marketed as the ultimate crown jewel of United Arab Emirates real estate. The most untouchable, hyper-exclusive address for global oligarchs, crypto tycoons, and old money tycoons. Instead, its own high-net-worth owners are calling it a billion-dollar monument to a single fatal design decision. The choice that a mega project must look flawless on Instagram, even if it cannot physically survive the brutal Arabian Gulf climate. Graphic on screen. 500+ separate defects, life safety warnings. Narrator, make no mistake. This is not a few hairline cosmetic cracks in the plaster. The tower's elite owner association says independent structural consultants have just documented more than 500 separate engineering defects, many of them explicitly flagged as critical life safety issues. International investors who dropped up to $20 million for a single half-floor shell are now steered down a catastrophic repair assessment that early estimates pin at a staggering $160 million. Sound effect, metal cracking under tension. Narrator. And here is the detail that should terrify anyone walking down the marina promenade below. That immaculate, architectural white concrete you see gleaming under the desert sun? It isn't cosmetic cladding. It isn't a decorative curtain wall. It is the building's load-bearing exterior exoskeleton. It is the literal spine holding this entire Supertall upright against high-altitude Gulf winds. Graphic fly-in. 20 million thousand apartments. Full 1,500 in structural defects. 160,000. Narrator. Those three numbers belong to the exact same Dubai luxury tower, and every single one of them traces back to one shocking root cause. So here is the multi-million-dollar question that the developers could not answer for years. How does a brand new, record-breaking, top-of-the-market skyscraper start structurally deteriorating less than a decade after completion, when the legendary minds who designed it saw the failure coming from miles away? Music swells, dramatic title card, the cost of coucher real estate. Music transition, low, ominous synth mixed with the sound of industrial drills and the wiring of desert-wind course. Narrator. To fully grasp how a $1.3 billion crown jewel of the Dubai skyline transformed into a multi-million-dollar legal war zone, you have to rewind the clock to the mid-2000s. This was the golden era of UAE hyper-development, a time when the sand dunes of the marina and downtown were being systematically replaced by a forest of concrete and glass. And global investors were throwing money at anything that broke a world record. Enter a hyper-ambitious regional developer, the kind of visionary tycoon most of the traditional engineering establishment thought had completely lost his mind. Archival footage, Dubai Marina in the mid-2000s. Black and wheat, Prado Decens, flying across the screen. Narrator. This developer didn't want just another glass box bolted onto the coastline. They wanted to claim the absolute title of the tallest residential-only building in the Middle East. To bankroll a dream this massive, they partnered with an ultra-deep-pocketed investment syndicate out of Los Angeles, pooling billions in capital. But it was their choice of architect that set this disaster in motion. They bypassed the standard corporate high-rise firms and handed the keys to a world-renowned, radical architect celebrated for avant-garde museums and high-art concert halls, not luxury residential supertalls, and that architect gave them a blueprint that was terrifyingly radical in its simplicity. Graphic, 3D CAD model of the tower, highlighting its ultra-slender Grejum Raider. The design? A geometrically perfect square tube, measuring exactly 93.5 feet on each side, rising nearly 1,400 feet directly into the Arabian sky. That creates a staggering height-to-width ratio of roughly 15:1. To put that in perspective, Imagine a standard number 2 pencil standing upright on its eraser in the middle of a wind tunnel. The architect proudly told the international press that the aesthetic inspiration didn't come from traditional engineering or local heritage. It came from a 1905 modernist trash can designed by an Austrian artist. Think about that for a second. A multi-billion-dollar luxury tower designed to house the wealthiest human beings on the planet, modeled directly on a wastebasket. You literally cannot make this script up. Then came the defining feature, the windows. Zoom in on the grid pattern of the exoskeleton frame. Narrator. Instead of a standard curtain wall of continuous glass panels hung from an internal steel frame like 99% of the mega projects lining Sheikh Zayed Road. This tower utilized a flawless, uninterrupted grid of 10-foot by 10-foot square openings, identical from the ground floor all the way to the upper penthouse. No setbacks, no ornamental trim, no glass skin covering the structure. And that design choice is the single most critical detail of this entire investigative file. Because at this Dubai icon, the pristine, blindingly white concrete you see from the beach or the yacht club isn't a decorative paneling system. It is the building's load-bearing exoskeleton. In luxury high-rise construction, standard engineering places thick steel and concrete columns deep inside the interior of the floor plates, away from the elements. But here, the skin and the skeleton are the exact same thing. The outer white concrete grid is doing the heavy lifting, taking the immense structural loads of the Supertall and transferring them to the deep desert bedrock. Engineers will tell you that when a design like this works, it's a masterpiece. But it also means that the moment that exposed white concrete begins to show signs of structural distress, you are not looking at a superficial cosmetic issue. You aren't looking at bad paint. You are looking directly at the cracking bones of the building. Sound effect. Cash Roger Cha Ching mixed with cold wind narrator. Despite the architectural risks, the marketing machine worked flawlessly. The tower's roughly 100 hyper-luxury apartments hit the international market with an aggregate sellout target close to $3.1 billion. The hype was real. Ultra-high net worth buyers, from European hedge fund managers to regional oil magnates, snapped up the units. One anonymous billionaire shelled out an astronomical $91 million just to secure 3 consecutive penthouse floors at the absolute summit. When the tower finally topped out at the end of 2015, it completely dominated the local coastline. It didn't just join the world-famous skyline. It rose aggressively above the surrounding luxury high-rises, claiming the highest residential rooftop in the entire region. The developer's gamble had seemingly paid off. The ultra-exclusive address sold itself. For a brief window of time, it was the most envied, most photographed residential building in the Middle East. And then, the desert heat met reality. The cracks showed up. Dramatic whoosh sound effect with macro cam snapshots of concrete fissures narrator. At first, they were tiny. A microscopic hairline fracture near a window frame on an upper tier. A faint patch of discoloration underneath a structural beam. It was incredibly easy for the development team to dismiss these early warnings. After all, what massive concrete structure doesn't go through a minor settling phase, especially a tower barely old enough for kindergarten? But in the unforgiving world of high-stress structural engineering, cracks in a load-bearing concrete exoskeleton are never just cracks. Here is exactly why elite structural consultants lose sleep over them. It all boils down to a destructive, cascading chemical and mechanical process known as spalling. Animated explanation in the script tone, showing water and salt penetrating concrete. Grid. Narrator. Concrete is an exceptional material under compression, but it is fundamentally porous. It breathes, and it is absolutely not waterproof by default. When a Supertall tower experiences high-altitude wind loads, it flexes. That flexing introduces immense tensile stress to the exterior face, causing microcracks to snap open. In the unique environment of coastal Dubai, those microcracks encounter a double whammy of environmental destruction. First, you have intense humidity coming off the Persian Gulf, carrying highly corrosive airborne sea salts. Second, you have winter rainstorms and heavy morning dew condensation. When these tiny fractures open up, moisture laden with sea salt seeps deep into the concrete core. Eventually, That moisture reaches the heavy steel reinforcing bars. The rebar, buried deep inside the matrix that gives the structure its ultimate tensile strength. And what happens when high-grade structural steel meets moisture and oxygen? It begins to rust. But here is the catastrophic twist. As steel rusts, it chemically expands. The oxidized steel can swell up to several times its original physical volume. As the rebar expands inside the cured rigid concrete, it generates an immense, unstoppable outward mechanical pressure. The steel literally acts like an internal hydraulic wedge, pushing against the concrete from the inside out until it shoves massive chunks of the exterior structure completely off the face of the building. That is structural spalling on an ordinary commercial office block or a low-rise parking garage. Spalling is an expensive maintenance headache, but on a hyper-luxury Supertall whose raw concrete skin is also its primary load-bearing spine, sitting nearly 2,400 feet directly above a densely packed multi-million-dollar marina promenade, structural spalling shifts from a maintenance issue to a severe life safety crisis. Sound effect. Slam of a legal gavel narrator. So how does a pristine multi-billion-dollar luxury icon end up with structurally cracking concrete less than 10 years into its lifespan? This is the exact point where our investigation stops looking like an unfortunate engineering accident and starts looking like a calculated risk that went horribly wrong. Because according to a bombshell lawsuit later filed by the tower's own owner association, the elite teams designing and building this project saw this exact concrete failure coming in writing years before the construction cranes were ever dismantled. Screen graphic. Excerpts from Indel correspondence, stamped, confidential narrator. In internal legal discovery, documents and corporate emails leaked to investigative journalists. Members of the core design and engineering teams were locked in fierce internal debates over the exact concrete formulation that is failing today. As far back as 2012, while the tower was still a half-built concrete skeleton rising out of the sand, a senior director at the architect's own firm issued a chilling, written warning to the project management team. The email explicitly stated that they were heading down a dangerous and slippery path, one that the director confidently predicted would culminate in structural failure and massive, multi-million-dollar legal warfare. Let that sink in. The architect's own internal design directors were forecasting their own future lawsuits while the concrete mixers were still actively pouring the foundations. But the most damning piece of evidence uncovered by investigators wasn't a dramatic, multi-page memo. It was a cold, brutal, three-word ultimatum delivered by a lead structural engineering consultant on the project. The engineer boiled the entire multi-billion-dollar design crisis down to three simple words: color or cracks. Text flays across the screen in bold red. Color or cracks, narrator. It was an engineering absolute. The design team was told in plain, unmistakable language that they could have the pure, uninterrupted, blindingly white architectural concrete look that made the wastebasket aesthetic so striking to billionaires. Or they could modify the concrete mix design and structural properties to create a flexible, durable exterior surface that fundamentally resisted cracking under extreme thermal expansion and high wind sway. They were told they could not have both. It was a binary choice: safety and durability on one side, aesthetic perfection on the other. The investigation revealed that there was actually an explicit engineering fix placed directly on the table during these mid-construction crisis meetings. The structural consultants recommended coating the entire raw concrete exoskeleton in a specialized, high-build, flexible elastomeric paint. Think of it as a high-tech, rubberized protective membrane that would completely seal the exterior concrete against coastal moisture, humidity, and salt penetration, safely bridging any minor hairline cracks before they could ever grow into structural spalling. But there was a fatal catch. That thick protective coating would have slightly altered the texture and dulled the raw, matte architectural concrete finish that the entire tower's elite marketing campaign was built upon. Applying the protective coat meant sacrificing a fraction of the aesthetic perfection, and so, the lawsuit alleges, the engineering recommendation was systematically waved off by the development executives. The pure white look won. the long-term structural integrity lost. Now, it is critical to state that the developers vehemently reject every single one of these allegations. In public statements and legal counterfilings, they deny concealing any structural defects from buyers or regulators. They call the owner association's multi-million-dollar claims completely meritless, pointing out that the Supertall successfully cleared all initial municipal structural handovers and has passed localized facade safety inspections. We will dissect the developer's technical defense later in this script because it reveals a massive loophole in how luxury megaprojects are regulated. But look at the staggering picture we have uncovered so far. A record-breaking residential Supertall, a pure white structural spine designed to endure extreme Gulf winds, a documented paper trail of expert warnings explicitly stating the exterior would crack, and an executive decision to build it exactly that way regardless. And as the first wave of elite residents began moving their fortunes into the sky, they quickly discovered that the cracking exterior concrete was actually the least of their worries. The tower was already preparing its next disaster, from the inside out, fast-paced, television, autobeat slams in a raider. When part 3 of this investigation continues, we pull back the curtain on the hidden internal chaos of this billionaire's playground. Because long before the concrete exoskeleton began to fail, the tower started doing something no luxury building on Earth should ever do. It began systematically flooding its own ultra-high-end apartments from the inside out, turning $20 million penthouses into high-altitude swamps. Click next to watch part 3 right now. Music transition. Reverberating sound of water droplets, under high pressure, met with a sudden, dissonant industrial hum narrator. Imagine paying $20 million for a luxury sky mansion floating 1,000 feet above the Dubai Marina. You expect absolute architectural perfection. You expect an untouchable sanctuary where your wealth isolates you from the harsh realities of the world below. Instead, you move in, step onto your custom-imported Italian marble floors, and find yourself ankle-deep in a high-altitude swamp. Cut 2. Graphic animation of a super-tall skyscraper. Cut in half. Plumbing. Systems bursting under intente. Stract pressurator. Long before the structural concrete on the exterior began its public cracking phase, the tower's internal mechanics were already in a state of absolute, systemic meltdown. By 2016, as the first wave of elite international buyers and ultra-high net worth expats began moving into the most expensive residential real estate in the United Arab Emirates, they made a horrifying discovery. Their architectural dream home had a catastrophic plumbing problem. And it didn't start small. It started with a deluge. In 2016, a prominent international investor who had signed a multi-million-dollar contract to purchase a massive shell and core unit on the 84th floor arrived for a final pre-handover walkthrough. What they discovered shook them so deeply that they walked away from the entire transaction on the spot, legally forfeiting their deposits and citing what independent engineering reports later classified as a catastrophic, multi-floor internal flood. But the development team managed to keep that quiet. They patched the drywall, buffed the stone, and kept selling the dream until November 2018. That was the month the tower's internal infrastructure declared absolute war on its inhabitants. Sound effect, the explosive pop of a high-pressure valve, reverberating through an elevator shaft narrator, deep within the mechanical heart of the upper tiers. A high-pressure plumbing component completely failed. Because of the sheer physics required to pump water nearly 1,400 feet straight up into the sky, the hydrostatic pressure inside a residential Supertall is immense. When that component blew, it didn't just create a localized leak. It sent thousands of gallons of pressurized water pouring directly into the main high-speed elevator shafts. The water cascaded down the shafts like a vertical river, shorting out the complex electronic guidance systems and completely knocking 2 of the tower's 4 main residential elevator banks entirely out of service. In a standard mid-rise building, losing an elevator is an annoying inconvenience. In an ultra-slender Supertall of this scale, losing half your vertical transit capacity isn't an inconvenience. It is an absolute localized logistical crisis. Residents living near the cloud line were trapped in their penthouses for hours, waiting for a single functioning cab to crawl up from the lobby. And the water simply refused to stop coming. According to insurance data and owner association documents later brought to light, just 2 major water-related mechanical incidents in 2018 alone piled up a staggering $9.7 million in covered structural insurance losses. Let that sink in. Nearly $10 million in damage from water pipes before the building was even 5 years old. As a direct result of these systemic plumbing failures, the tower's comprehensive insurance premiums skyrocketed, roughly tripling in a span of just 24 months. One individual owner reported over $500,000 in personal property damage to a single bespoke apartment after a mechanical riser above their ceiling ruptured while they were traveling abroad. Sound effect, low, anxiety-inducing creaking of metal and concrete narrator. But as bad as the internal flooding was, it was the soundscape of the tower that truly began to break the psychological resolve of Dubai's elite, because this icon is so impossibly tall and so incredibly slender, physics dictates that it must sway in the wind. High-altitude structural movement is completely by design. If a Supertall is too rigid, the extreme wind loads coming off the Persian Gulf would snap it like glass. But while engineering models show that movement is safe, they rarely account for what that movement sounds like to a human being trying to sleep inside a luxury residence. Elite owners began reporting that whenever high-velocity desert windstorms hit the coast, the entire building came alive with a terrifying acoustic soundtrack, creaking, groaning, loud, rhythmic banging deep within the interior walls. Multiple high-profile tenants compared the experience to being trapped inside the rusted hull of an old cargo ship during a Category 5 hurricane. Then there was the trash chute. Because of the building's relentless, uncompromised vertical drop, the trash system became a sonic nightmare. Residents reported that whenever a heavy bag of waste was dropped from the upper penthouses, the acceleration inside the straight, unbaffled chute caused it to break the sound barrier of the interior corridor, sounding like a literal bomb detonating when it finally impacted the lower collection facility. Text on screen: intolerable noise and vibration. Narrator: the psychological toll wasn't just confined to the buyers. In one of the most damning revelations uncovered in the owner association's comprehensive legal complaint, even a senior executive chairman of the development syndicate privately conceded in internal communications that the structural noise and high-altitude vibrations during storm season were completely intolerable. The very individual who bankrolled the creation of this architectural icon admitted in writing that it was practically impossible to sleep inside the tower during adverse weather conditions. Think about the profound irony of that moment. The man who sold the most exclusive peaceful sky sanctuary in the region couldn't even manage to get a full night's sleep inside his own creation. And on Halloween night in 2019, that architectural nightmare shifted from psychological torment to a terrifying physical reality for one unlucky resident. Sound defect: the dragging mechanical screech of an emergency brake engine narrator during a period of severe, high-velocity coastal winds. A resident stepped into one of the remaining operational high-speed elevator cabs on a lower floor. As the cab accelerated upward, a massive wind gust slammed into the exterior of the tower, causing the slender concrete exoskeleton to flex violently. The structural sway was so extreme that it threw the elevator's steel counterweight cables entirely out of alignment. Automated safety protocols instantly engaged, slamming the emergency brakes on and trapping the resident inside a cramped, dark metal box. They weren't trapped for 5 minutes. They weren't trapped for 10. This resident was suspended inside a swaying, creaking Supertall elevator shaft for roughly an hour and a half, listening to the building groan and flex around them in the dark while civil defense teams scrambled to manually override the system. This was the dark reality of life at the top. A building programmed to systematically throttle its own elevators to a crawl whenever the weather turned, because the alternative was a catastrophic cable tangle, music swells, driving impulsive beat. Now, here is the part of this investigative file that should bother you the most as a consumer of modern real estate. None of this internal chaos, none of this structural deflection, and none of these plumbing failures were a secret to the executive suites who possessed the ultimate power to halt the project. The technical warnings were documented internally. The expert structural recommendations to coat the exoskeleton were explicitly rejected to preserve the pure white aesthetic. Yet, despite all of this internal panic, the tower sailed seamlessly through every single municipal approval, regulatory sign-off, and compliance milestone required to legally market and sell these multi-million-dollar apartments to an unsuspecting global public on official paper. This tower was completely up to code. The traditional regulatory framework designed to protect real estate buyers completely failed to flag these structural vulnerabilities because standard municipal inspections are built to check checkboxes. They are not designed to audit the long-term viability of a radical, experimental 15-to-1 slenderness ratio, and if you think this is an isolated incident, a single, cursed, poorly managed tower on the edge of the marina, you need to look up at the modern skyline, fast-paced montage of sledder glass and concrete towers gleaming, the Sun narrator. This specific tower wasn't just a standalone project, it was the structural prototype that kicked off an entire generation of impossibly thin, needle-like skyscrapers across the luxury zones of Dubai and the wider UAE. A hyper-slender arms race where developers consistently raced to build taller, narrower, and skinnier than the competition, pushing structural physics to the absolute bleeding edge of what modern materials allow. And across several of these new pencil towers, the exact same whispers are beginning to escape the concrete walls. Complaints of unmanageable structural sway, continuous mechanical elevator shutdowns, and inexplicable internal plumbing failures. This tower wasn't the exception to the rule. It was the blueprint for a systemic shift in luxury real estate design, the ultimate warning sign of what happens when engineering humility is completely sacrificed on the altar of architectural ambition. But Dubai's ultra-wealthy elite are not the types to quietly suffer in silence while their trophy assets deteriorate around them. They wanted answers. They wanted financial accountability. And so, they did exactly what billionaires do. Whenever they find themselves profoundly unhappy, they unleashed an army of high-stakes corporate attorneys, and what those lawyers uncovered deep within the paper trail would turn a standard construction dispute into one of the ugliest, most sensational legal wars in the history of Middle Eastern real estate. Cable News' Breaking Sound, narrator. When Part 4 of this investigation continues, we dive straight into the heart of a 7-million-page legal war. Because just when you think a story about cracking concrete and high-altitude floods couldn't possibly get any stranger, the lawyers claim they didn't just find bad workmanship. They found a coordinated, multi-million-dollar paper trail cover-up. Click it next to watch Part 4 right now. Music transition. Aggressive, propulsive electronic beat, the kind used for primetime investigative exposés. Upbeat but cold, driving the narrative forward with maximum urgency, narrator. 7 million pages of classified corporate documents, 100 days of high stakes, under oath depositions. When the owner association of this multi-billion-dollar Dubai Supertall finally realized that their luxury sky sanctuaries were fundamentally compromised, they didn't just file a standard maintenance claim. They unleashed a legal scorched earth campaign that completely shattered the polite, polished facade of the high-end UAE property market. And what their elite legal teams pulled out of the dark turned a messy construction dispute into something much uglier than anyone anticipated. Cut 2. Graphic map screen, highlighting Emirati, legal courts and dispute centers narrator. The legal warfare didn't just happen overnight. It came in devastating, calculated waves. It began in 2021, when the building's upscale owner board officially launched a blockbuster lawsuit targeting the primary development syndicate, the international investment backers, and the core engineering entities. The initial filings were brutal. They cited more than 500 distinct structural, mechanical, and design defects, explicitly framing dozens of them as critical, non-negotiable life safety issues. The financial demand, a jaw-dropping $250 million in direct rectification costs, coupled with massive, unprecedented punitive damages. For nearly 4 years, the developers attempted to contain the fallout behind closed doors, burying the dispute under a mountain of procedural delays, non-disclosure agreements, and complex jurisdictional arguments. But the owners refused to back down. They poured millions of dollars into their own private engineering audits, hiring independent structural forensic teams to drill deep into the building's core. And by the spring of 2025, that relentless legal pressure culminated in a massive escalatory breakthrough, sound effect. Camouflage and Gavel Metallic Echo, narrator. The owner association returned to the legal arena, filing a heavily expanded, blistering new complaint that sent shockwaves through every major real estate boardroom from Dubai to Abu Dhabi. The new legal brief didn't just use the word defective. It escalated the language to an entirely new tier of severity, officially accusing the master developers, the investment syndicate, and several of the primary architectural and structural engineering firms of orchestrating a massive, systemic, and far-reaching corporate fraud. According to the explosive terms of the 2025 complaint, this wasn't a case of a contractor simply cutting corners on a hot summer afternoon. The owners are alleging a deliberate multi-year conspiracy to actively conceal the structural vulnerabilities of the concrete exoskeleton from wealthy buyers, international investors, and municipal building inspectors alike. The legal team explicitly claims they built this ironclad fraud case on a mountain of hard evidence, a literal paper trail spanning over 7 million pages of internal emails, private design changes, rejected engineering memos, and 100 days of intensely adversarial depositions with the project's lead coordinators. With this new evidence in hand, the financial stakes shifted, with the board aggressively pursuing a direct, immediate cash recovery, exceeding $165 million just to fund the baseline structural stabilization of the tower's failing spine. Cut to split screen showing the syndicate's Replis vs. The architect's position, narrator. But if you think the corporate giants who built this $1.3 billion monument are quietly backing down or hiding in shame, you don't understand how high-stakes real estate works in the UAE. The defendants are fighting back with an absolute vengeance. The Master Development Corporation and the prominent architect of record have both vehemently and publicly denied every single allegation of fraud, negligence, and concealment. Their corporate defense teams immediately launched a series of aggressive legal counterstrikes, moving to have the entire million-dollar lawsuit thrown completely out of the judicial system on technical grounds. Meanwhile, the multinational structural engineering firm that oversaw the calculation of the 15:1 slenderness ratio has retreated behind a wall of absolute silence, repeatedly declining to issue any public comments regarding the structural integrity of the white concrete matrix. But it is the developer's public relations strategy that reveals the truly toxic, upside-down reality of luxury real estate disputes. A designated spokesperson for the building's original development group stepped forward with a defense strategy that is as brilliant as it is infuriating. They are arguing before the courts that the tower's controversial exterior exoskeleton has actually been repeatedly certified as structurally safe under a localized, rolling facade repair and maintenance program, and then they turn the entire narrative right back on the victims. Text on screen. Blame the owner's narrator. The developer's legal team is officially countering that if the white concrete exoskeleton is cracking and deteriorating today, it isn't because of a fundamental design flaw or a rejected mid-construction warning. No, they are claiming it is the owners themselves who have catastrophically failed to maintain their own building. The defense argues that the owner association refused to properly fund and execute the specialized, routine maintenance required for an advanced architectural structure, specifically, failing to regularly reapply the advanced protective chemical sealers that shield the exposed concrete from Dubai's hyper-saline coastal atmosphere. In other words, do not blame the multi-billion-dollar developers who built a tower modeled on a modernist trash can. Blame the wealthy residents who bought the apartments for not spending millions more to constantly repaint the outside of a structural spine that they were told was flawless from day one. Dramatic. Synth. Narrator. So while the multi-million-dollar legal machinery grinds on through the judicial system, Let's ask the question that matters most to the global financial markets. Who is actually losing cold, hard cash right now? The answer is simple. Almost every single person holding a title deed to an apartment inside that building. Remember, these are not standard middle-class residential apartments. These are ultra-exclusive sky mansions that originally traded on the open market for $10 million, $20 million, and even a staggering $88 million for the upper-tier layouts. These are assets bought by the ultra-wealthy specifically because they are supposed to serve as an unshakable, appreciating store of value, a trophy asset that projects power and security. But in the cutthroat world of Dubai luxury real estate, perception is absolute reality. Brand equity is everything. And a Supertall luxury icon that becomes globally branded as a structurally defective, leaking, cracking legal war zone is a building where it becomes practically impossible to liquidate an asset at full market price. Graphic animation. Property value plummeting with expense arrows. Stacking narrator. Layer on top of that decimated resale value the crushing, inescapable financial weight of reality. To keep the building functioning while the court battle rages, the owner board has had to levy massive, unprecedented special assessments on the residents. Every single owner is being forced to cut massive out-of-pocket checks just to cover the rapidly expanding costs of emergency engineering patches, the tripled structural insurance premiums, and the multi-million-dollar corporate legal fees required to keep the lawsuit alive. Suddenly, some of the wealthiest investors on Earth are watching their ultimate, prized trophy asset curdle into an active, bleeding financial liability right before their eyes. So what should have happened? If you sit down with the independent structural forensic engineers who are currently analyzing the physical degradation of the tower, they will tell you that the engineering solution to this entire billion-dollar disaster was almost boringly, frustratingly simple. All the developers had to do back in 2012 was check their corporate ego at the door. Take the expert structural warning seriously. Listen to the architect's own internal directors. Apply thick, flexible, elastomeric protective coating to the exterior grid during the initial build phase, and accept the simple, logical reality that a slightly less blinding, slightly less Instagram-perfect shade of white concrete was a microscopic price to pay for a Supertall building designed to actually last for a century. Instead, independent structural engineers who have reviewed the localized core samples say a 10-year-old concrete tower simply should not be experiencing this scale of accelerated structural deterioration under any standard environmental conditions. And the financial penalty for that aesthetic stubbornness? The latest independent engineering estimates to execute a full permanent structural fix, a massive, multi-year, highly complex structural overhaul of that entire 400-foot concrete exoskeleton from a suspended external scaffolding network, runs to a jaw-dropping $160 million low. T-scound effect with fade to black narrator. Today, the tower still stands. It still forms a prominent, gleaming silhouette against the Dubai skyline. Its units are still technically listed on premium real estate portals, and according to municipal records, it still technically passes its baseline facade safety inspections. There is absolutely no definitive engineering evidence to suggest the tower is at any immediate risk of a catastrophic structural collapse, but as it enters its second decade of existence, it now carries two completely irreconcilable reputations at the exact same time. It is simultaneously one of the most prestigious, ultra-expensive luxury addresses on the face of the earth, and a terrifying, cautionary tale whispered in elite engineering circles about what happens when raw human ambition completely outruns basic engineering humility. Which brings us directly to the single, chilling detail that ties this entire multi-billion-dollar investigative file together. Because before I show you how this high-stakes story truly ends, there's one final, overlooked piece of evidence that changes absolutely everything you think you know about the modern skyline. Fast-paced television outro beat crescendos. Narrator, when Part 5, the final chapter of this investigative documentary, concludes. We expose the exact three-word choice that sealed this tower's fate before the first bucket of concrete was ever poured. We look at the chilling future risk facing the entire generation of pencil towers lining the Gulf Coast, and we ask the ultimate question: how many more of the iconic luxury Supertalls we praise every single day are secretly hiding the exact same fatal compromise? Click next to watch the final chapter in Part 5 right now. Music transition. The driving Metropolitan beat drops out replaced by a low, heart-stopping Acost drone with the slow tapping of a computer keyboard narrator. We have dissected the $1.3 billion budget. We have mapped out the 1,100 individual structural defects, the multi-million-dollar high-altitude floods, and the 7 million-page fraud case currently tearing through the legal system. But as we reach the end of this investigative file, we have to confront the single, defining detail that ties this entire international disaster together. Because before you look up at the Dubai Marina or the downtown skyline the same way again, you need to understand that the most important decision in this entire history was not made by a low-level subcontractor mixing concrete on a site. It wasn't made by a municipal inspector holding a clipboard, and it wasn't caused by the brutal desert weather. It was made in a single, high-stakes corporate email. And it was exactly 3 words long. Slowly on bold, white, metallic lettering narrator, color or cracks. That is the absolute unyielding binary choice that a lead structural engineer laid out in plain, unmistakable text years before the first resident ever signed a contract or moved a single piece of furniture into the sky. It wasn't a vague, hypothetical worry. It wasn't a cautious engineering footnote buried at the bottom of a 400-page manual. It was a clear, direct warning delivered straight to the executive suites of the development syndicate. The structural consultants were telling them, "You can have the flawless, uninterrupted, blindingly white architectural concrete surface that makes this design look like an untouched, high art masterpiece under the Arabian sun. Or you can change the mix, apply the protective elastomeric coating, and have a structural frame that physically resists cracking and spalling over the next century. Pick one. Because you cannot have both." And remember exactly how this entire mega project started. It began with a developer who wanted a building so radical, so uncompromised in its purity, that the address would completely sell itself to the wealthiest people on the planet. They wanted a perfectly smooth square, rising into the clouds with absolutely no ornament, no setbacks, no traditional glass curtain wall, nothing to interrupt that iconic, pure white skin. So when they were forced to vote on that ultimate engineering ballot, the lawsuit alleges they didn't hesitate. They picked color. If the owner association's massive legal filing is right, that is the entire heartbreaking story of this $1.3 billion disaster summed up in 3 words. They were told in advance that the tower could look perfect, or it could last. And they chose how it would look. Sound effect, distant gust of wine slamming against glass narrator. Every great skyscraper built in the modern era is supposed to be a sacred architectural promise. A physical guarantee made by the people who shape our cities that beauty and structural safety can permanently share the same address. This Dubai icon is what happens when those 2 fundamental principles are put head-to-head in a corporate boardroom, and only one of them is allowed to win. But the true legacy of this tower isn't just the $160 million repair bill facing its current owners, and it isn't the high-stakes legal warfare playing out in the regulatory courts. The true legacy is what this building represents for the future of the entire global skyline. This tower was the pioneer. It was the experimental prototype for an entire generation of impossibly thin, needle-like pencil towers that now define luxury real estate across the major hubs of the United Arab Emirates. It proved to the financial markets that you could take a microscopic piece of land, push slenderness to the absolute limit of physics, and successfully flip the resulting sky mansions to global capital for billions of dollars. But now that the prototype's bones are cracking, and its internal pipes are bursting under pressure, the clock is officially ticking for every other hyper-slender mega-project that followed in its footsteps. Which leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question, worth sitting with the next time you look up at the icons of modern engineering. How many more of the world-famous luxury towers we praise every single day were quietly given the exact same ultimatum behind closed doors? color, or cracks, and made the exact same choice. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications for more deep dive engineering investigations, and we will see you on the next file. Music smash to black. Credits roll, with digital soundbite ticking to a stop.